Welcome to the Domain Name Wire podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Alleman, and this is episode number 545. The internet and how we are using it is rapidly changing due to artificial intelligence. I've had a number of conversations with people about how this might impact domain names. And although the full ramifications of AI for domain names isn't understood, we've already seen some changes. For example, we're seeing changes to how domain names are being registered and even where that's happening. We're also seeing demand for domain names from the rise of vibe coding or AI-powered tools that make it easier for people, whether they be developers already or just people like me that aren't that technical, to develop apps. Well, last week, Name.com released a new API that's designed to integrate with AI tools and agents. On today's show, I talk with Carlos Armada, who is the director of product at Name.com. We talk about what changes the company needed to make to its API for it to work better with AI tools. And we also have a general discussion about AI agents and whether AI development tools are all they're cracked up to be. This is definitely an area to watch, and I think it's important for everyone in the domain name industry: registrars, registries, and yes, domain name investors. All right, we'll chat with Carlos in a few minutes. First, a word from our sponsor. Our sponsor this week is Sav.com and its domain auctions. Sav auctions are a great way to liquidate domain names. I've sold a few domains through Sav auctions. It was quick and easy, and they had a great transfer process. In fact, if your domains are already at Sav, they transfer automatically. And perhaps best of all, sellers pay just a 4% commission on their domain sales through Sav auctions. Learn more and start selling your domains at Sav. Go to sav.com/DNW/sell. That's sav.com/DNW/sell. Let's run through some news from the past week before we chat with Carlos. First up, Web3 naming platform Freename has raised a $6.5 million Series A round. Like many Web3 naming companies, it started light by offering what it called Web3 domain names. These are effectively alt-root domains that can be connected to wallets. Since then, it has become an ICANN accredited registrar and is trying to bridge Web 2 and Web 3. Its competitors include D3 and Unstoppable Domains, among others. Well, way back in 2012, I wrote about a UDRP dispute in which a panelist ordered the domain marker.com transferred. The domain was part of Tucow's large portfolio of surname domain names it acquired from Mailbank in 2006. Now, Tucow sued before that UDRP was actually decided in 2012, and now in 2025, the case has finally been resolved in Tucow's favor. The court decision came to light in a UDRP for Peet.com, that's Peet.com, that Tucow's just won. Now, the Canadian court where the case was decided doesn't publish full dockets, so it's not clear why it took so long for the case to be resolved. Saw.com launched a new website last week that moves it more toward being a marketplace. The company already allows people to list domain names for sale and use its landing pages, but the only way people could find the domains for sale was by landing on those for sale landing pages. Saw.com's website promoted the ability to buy and sell domains and hire its brokers, but not much more. Now it's more like a marketplace with a search box front and center. You might recall that Saw.com's founder, Jeffrey Gabriel, used to work at Uniregistry, and Uniregistry also had for sale landers that drove the bulk of sales, but they also had a search feature, and I asked Jeffrey if that drove sales, the search box. He said yes, but landing pages will still be the primary driver of those sales. Well, Cito's sales results for the past 2 weeks have included more than 100 sales of over $2,000, which is a lot more than usual. I think this might have to do with Namecheap promoting Cito MLS domains ahead of Afternic listings. The top .com sale last week from Cito was Buno.com, Buno.com. And I'm kind of wiping some tears over this one. I once owned this domain name, and I sold it for a lot less than the $95,000 it just sold for. Now, to be fair, I sold the domain way back in 2005, and domain valuations have changed a lot since then, especially for 4-character domains. And the person I sold it to back then sold it to another person who sold it to another person, and so on down the chain. And there's no way I would have held out for the $95,000 either. I believe I hand registered this domain name while I was in college back in 2000. You can see a list of over 30 end-user domain name sales that recently transacted at Cito and a post on Domain Name Wire from July 23rd. I recorded the intro to this week's show early, so there's more news from late last week that you can check out on Domain Name Wire, including VeriSign's earnings. Go visit DNW.com to see the latest. But now, let's chat with Carlos. My guest this week is Carlos Armada. He is the Director of Product at Name.com. Carlos, welcome to the show.
Great to be here.
So, Carlos, there are a lot of domain registrars out there. I think many of my listeners are familiar with Name.com, but for those that aren't, tell me kind of where it fits in the marketplace, who your typical customers are.
Yeah, traditionally, I feel like when Name first came on the market, we've always been one of those registrars that does really well with more technical users that really just want a clean registrar experience that isn't going to hammer you too hard on upsells and things you might not need. Over the years, where we've really grown some strength is what we call very, very small business owners. At Name.com, I think we even say VVSBs that really just want to find all of the right products in one place. And something we saw in the market 5-6 years ago was a lot of registrars would build these white labeled solutions, whether it's email or website builders. And sometimes it just wasn't the right fit for our customers. So we really made an effort to team up with best in class companies like Google, like Wix, to bring what we thought were the best in each category to our customers where you could kind of get everything one place. So naturally, that kind of division created two parts of the market that we do really well with, which is those small business owners who just need the right best products all in one place, but also those technical users and users who might have loved Google, the Google registrar, that just want an easy way to buy a domain with transparent pricing and just get things up and running. I think we've still been satisfying both of those customer groups. And really, I think we're growing more and more in that technical space, which is obviously part of the reason I'm here today. So really excited to be serving those customers even more.
Yeah, and Name.com is owned by Identity Digital, which is, of course, a big player in the top-level domain space. And it seems like it's also kind of a testing ground for how Identity Digital, like I know there was kind of a new search tool that they came up with that they wanted registrars to try, so they can kind of try them on Name.com first and see how it works before pushing it out to other registrars.
Definitely. At the end of the day, I think we've always been on the forefront of adopting new TLDs as well, given who our parent company is. But we think as the market has changed and new TLDs have been adopted more and more, making it as easy as possible to find relevant, high quality new TLDs, whether that now is .ai or others, it should be as easy as possible. So while we're always going to serve the very popular generic TLDs, as we all know, making it really easy to, whether it's protecting your brand or finding an SLD or with good keywords on a new TLD, we want to make that kind of as easy as possible for our customers.
So let's talk about your new announcement, which is why I have you on the show today. What is Name.com launching?
Yeah, so we are launching the Name.com API. And what this is really for resellers, developers, anyone who wants to purchase, manage, and interact with all things domain programmatically via an API. We've had an API previously, but we've added a ton of new features and brought it over kind of to this new era of agentic AI and brought a lot of AI native capabilities. And one of the biggest ones being launching it on an open API spec, which I'm sure we'll get into the details a little bit more, but we're really excited about all the things that are coming with this new launch.
So as you mentioned, Name.com's had an API before, lots of domain registrars do, right? So what would you say makes this different and more compelling?
Definitely. The domain industry is arguably the longest piece of technology in the internet as far as enabling it. I mean, there's obviously some other pieces there, but when you look at the APIs that have been there and how we've serviced what for lack of a better term, resellers in the market. It's been very old XML-based APIs that for developers, put simply, is a huge pain. And we are the first API really to adopt the open API spec for domain registrars. And that enables two things. We have been using DX and AX a lot, and that is developer experience and agent experience. Traditionally, you hear about UX and UI, but these new termed coins, DX and AX, are becoming more and more relevant where in a market that you need to enable developers who are building against APIs and using AI coding tools like Cursor and vibe coding and all of these things to really interface what used to be maybe semi-complicated APIs with real-world applications. So using that DX and AX lens, we were really able to bring this reseller industry that's probably been stuck in the early 2000s into the 2025s or the 2020s, as I would call it, by leveraging some of these core principles that make it easy for AI agents and developers to work with APIs. That comes with easier error handling. It comes with really simple requests and responses. It comes with a full feature set so that at the end of the day, none of these customers want to be a registrar. I think you and I both know the industry can get complicated. There's compliance. There's all of these things that like our customers want to solve a pain point for their end user. It might be a vibe coding tool. It might be a link in bio product. It might be an email product. They don't want to solve and become a registrar. So this really reduces the barrier to reducing any friction associated with domain purchasing and domain management on a customer's platform. So we're really excited about that.
Let's kind of walk through a use case here. So we're targeting, you have these AI features, right? And you mentioned AI agents, that sort of thing, but you're really targeting those tools that enable people to build with AI. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. A quick little story of mine of like how I really got passionate about this area and name.com ended up investing more and more in this space was about a year ago. I started testing some of these early vibe coding tools. And for those of your users who don't know the term vibe coding yet, basically it's the traditional LLM experience prompt to idea. You can type an idea and then an AI agent will start actually writing code for you and generate what you asked it for, with a lot of variations, maybe some mistakes and things like that. And a year ago, you would ask it and maybe it could only build you a simple component or something like that. But I started to see kind of this very like clear progression in the industry where we were just going to completely change 0 to 1 prototyping. And we were going to really reduce the barrier to entry to building anything on the internet. And with tools like V0 and Replit and Lovable, I mean, every month there's a new player in this space. We're seeing more and more people who might have never been able to build come online and just say, I have an idea for this thing. For me, I just started building. I never used my standing desk. And I was like, build me an app that makes me use my standing desk a bit more, right?
I'm laughing because I'm sitting at my standing desk right now. And yeah, I forget to use it as well.
Yeah. And then I was like, and my wife was like, oh, we always find these recipes we love and then we can never find them again. Okay, build me an app that is a recipe saver. In my personal life, started seeing the usage go up and up. And the moment you're ready to deploy, most of these applications you deploy, and as a lot of your users know, if you use Wix or Squarespace, the first thing gets deployed to a subdomain. So it's like this Carlos Armada standing desk .vercel.app or something like that. And then you're like, okay, well, I want to get this to a custom domain or a subdomain on my own domain, carlosarmada.bio. But then they're like, here's some DNS records. Go to your registrar. Okay, copy, paste. You go over there, you maybe pasted it wrong. Maybe the TTL's wrong. I mean, even just listing off the different things right now, people are like, I don't know what you're talking about. And I heard one interesting stat from a partner where they're like, we don't offer domains, but 80% of our support tickets are domains related. So we're like, you know what? There's this growing problem, and AI is only going to make this grow larger and larger. It's just going to exaggerate because the barrier to build has gone down. So we've had a lot of success talking to partners and saying, we want to reduce your customer friction. We want you to have 2 clicks and you go from deploy to a real website live on your custom domain. And one of our key partners that we just launched with is Replit. And I think their integration speaks to this kind of flow where you could build anything you could dream of. You don't have to be a developer. And in 2 clicks, what might have been extremely complicated, whether you have appointment handling and payment integration and database integrations, are live to a custom domain. And that's just a huge paradigm shift for the industry. But to do that, we had to do a lot of things to make sure that our API was best fitted for an industry that's moving quickly, that might not have a ton of development resources to integrate domains, that really doesn't have a ton of domain experience. We're not talking about the incumbents in the space of Wix and Squarespace and those old players anymore. We're talking about companies that have existed for 6 months or 8 months, and they don't know about domains like we do. We love to be their partners and really simplify any customer friction that they might be experiencing around domains.
So you've kind of touched on this, but in a recent article, I want to quote what you said, quote, domains remain important, but they've shifted to play a role in the final stage, that moment when a project becomes real and ready to share. This redefines expectations for domain providers. They can no longer wait for users to come to them afterward. Instead, they must be present at the point of launch readiness, offering integrated domain search, availability, and setup within the very tools people use to create. So you're kind of saying, and you've given this example, like you create a tool and then you're like, oh, I want to launch this and I need a domain for it, or I need different domain services for it. I mean, this is kind of like, and you mentioned Wix, Squarespace, the entire domain search process. Would you argue it's kind of changed from, it used to be, I need a domain and then I'm going to work on a project, to I build a project and then I need a domain to launch it?
I think so. Yeah, I think both can exist and both will exist. But we're seeing a lot more. I just built something. I was inspired. And before, you might have had an idea and you're inspired and you're like, you know what, I'm thinking of a name for the business. And the first thing that makes it real is buying the domain. We've always known that's kind of one of those first steps. As any registrar would say, it's like, even the internal employees, it's like, how many of your dreams you could see in your domain portfolio? It's like, oh, those were 30 ideas I never got to. But I think with the rise of agentic building, you're going to have, instead of 30 domains, you're going to have 30 apps you built. I mean, we just talked about my standing desk and my recipe saver, and the barrier is gone. So it is basically evaporated to the point where in any of these platforms I've mentioned, I can have 30 or 40 apps or ideas that I could be sending to friends and users to get feedback, to really start thinking about the idea. And the beauty of it as well with AI is it's going to have all this context about what you're trying to build. So if you haven't really come to that naming stage, by the time you decide to name, it might actually help you say, oh, I love what you've been doing here and here and here. If we blend all these different pieces of context, here are some 20 business name ideas. And to the quotes point, if the search is embedded right into the launching and deployment and the building aspect, you won't have to even leave to go find the registrar of choice with the best pricing, with all the different things. You could just see the search results, pick the domain that's right for that project and get it launched. I will say this is more personal opinion, but I think there is more of a magic to when you send your friend the first prototype and it's on a custom domain and it feels real. It just feels better than on a subdomain of some other company that's like, here, test this idea out. But that's just personal preference.
So is this feasible today using the API you've launched? Like, could I get to that stage and then it's suggesting domains based on what I built? Or is this kind of future?
No, this is today. If you were to go to Replit today, their team built this, which is awesome. And one of the beauties of the API is we get to get awesome development teams start working with it, and they make things that we're even impressed by. So their team, basically, when you start building a project, it'll take the context and whatever you prompted it and give it a name. So I actually was just in Canada and I wanted to recreate this kind of what Apple Photos does, where it can map the photos you've taken in Canada to the geolocation and just create a little map. And I was like, okay, I'm going to vibe code this. And I gave it a prompt. I didn't give it a business name. It generated travel tracker as the name. And when I was ready to deploy, I clicked deploy. It's like, oh, do you want a custom domain here? It actually takes that context, puts in travel tracker before I even feed it that information, and uses our domain spinner to provide relevant domain suggestions. And one of the top results was tracker.travel, actually, which is really great. 2 keywords, short domain. And while I see the value in generics and .com and those kinds of things, I also love to see the value in a lower cost domain on a new TLD before I'm committing to an idea where I'm going to spend more. There's a ton of domains out there, as you and I know, that are $3, $5. And on a new TLD with great keywords, sometimes that's the best way to just get an application out there, a prototype out there, start getting feedback. You're never committing to the name at that stage, but this is available today at Replit.
Interesting. Okay. And help me understand a little bit more about like some of the features in the API that make this easier for Replit compared to even your old API, or let's just say generic domain registrar API.
Yeah. So at the foundation, it's the fact that we've moved to an open API spec. And what that basically does is it's a standardized specification that any developer that's worked with APIs at this point can read and immediately understand and not have to go, what are the quirks of this API? Similarly, if you think about it, a developer might be better at identifying quirks. AI is not very good at identifying that. So more and more people are using IDEs and tools like Cursor, Windsurf.
Sorry, IDE. I'm not familiar with that.
Oh, sorry. Like where developers actually code. So like where you're typing in code. So in that situation, more and more developers are using basically coding tools that where AI agents are writing some percentage of code.
Got it. Yeah.
And they will point an AI agent to an API spec and say, go build me a domain search experience based on this specification. And a well-established spec where the AI agent can understand everything is going to make it much, much easier for the agent to write high-quality code. So that has enabled developers and agents to read through our API docs and with high accuracy start building immediately. And we've seen build times that likely would have been 3 months long go down to 4 to 6 weeks. So we've really shrunk down the build time, and that's really important.
For integrating the API and all those features.
Yeah, exactly. So that's one piece. And then once you start getting into really the nitty gritty, which I don't think your users want to get into, where it's CC-TLDs and special TLD requirements and all these things that make registering non-ICANN domains very difficult, we've also added endpoints and features to simplify that. And we've added endpoints to simplify and make our pricing more transparent and all of those different pieces. And lastly, the one piece that we're really excited about is the MCP, which is Model Context Protocol. For AI agents, the best description I've heard when this started coming out is it's basically the USB-C for AI agents. And if you think of a USB-C port, an iPhone can charge with it. Now an Android can charge with it. It's really a standardization so that all of these different technologies can use the same communication or hardware layer to take some action. So if you apply that to how does OpenAI and how does Anthropic and how does Perplexity and how do all these different AI agents know how to interact with an API in the same fashion? Well, that's what an MCP would be. So we've built an MCP based on our open API spec. And what that allows is actually AI agents to interact with the API with basically 100% efficiency, or in that it can say, okay, I'm going to use the search endpoint to search domains. And this one's really, really exciting for the future of domains within the LLM and AI agent experience. And It's slightly different than the reseller conversation, but I truly believe we are approaching a world where from ChatGPT, I can say, are these domains available? And it just tells me if they are. And I say, go buy me that domain. And it purchases it. And then I say, go connect it to this website or this email. Given that we are almost entirely text-based industry, like as an e-commerce, it's just a name, it's just text. The form factor is incredible for AI agents and LLM experiences, the chat-based experiences. And this MCP is the first piece to bridging that gap where a user might never even need to go to a registrar to search, buy, and provision domains. And Name.com is really excited about being the only registrar in the world right now that has a live MCP that actually enables you to do that.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I guess you kind of answered this, but are we getting away from how domains are traditionally registered? And is this segmented by market, right? Like the small business, the yoga instructor wants to create a website, that sort of thing. They probably don't need to use what we think of right now as these LLMs. They don't need to go to ChatGPT, that sort of thing. But how do you view this? Like, will people in the future actually go to name.com to register domains? Or will they be doing it through other sources?
I would be happy if they didn't. I think some of them will. And I think there's always going to be a place for a more traditional e-commerce experience. But something that I think the domain industry has been rooted in for the last 20, 30 years is the fact that customers will come to us when they need a domain. And I think examples like the vibe coding that we were talking about earlier are showing we need to go to the customer. We need to go where they're building. We need to go where they are. And traditionally, we're all paying for ad placement at the top of Google search. But if they're no longer going to Google search and they're just going to ChatGPT to answer their questions, build me a business plan for this business. You might need a domain as part of that business plan. Why not do it right there? And at Name.com, we are true believers of meeting our customers, our users, or future users where they are. And I believe that the MCP and the things we just talked about are the first step to doing that.
I'm curious. I've been thinking a lot about how AI changes domain names and in the industry. And this is one aspect of it. But I also look at demand for domain names. And I remember mentioning once about how online publishing is changing because, as you mentioned, people are going to ChatGPT rather than Google, right? And ChatGPT is just giving you the information you need rather than going to the websites, which in the long run will be interesting to see what happens with people actually creating websites if they can't get traffic to them anymore and how that feeds into AI, right? There's kind of this, it's feeding in, but I almost wonder if there's going to be decreased demand in certain segments here, which would be the just kind of content publishing, if you will. Certainly tutorial sites are just being obliterated. Recipe sites are being obliterated by this. Do you see demand for certain types of domains then going down, but then maybe more demand for like creating these custom apps that you're mentioning, like the sit stand does? How do you see this playing out?
Yeah, I think no one knows. So I'll preface my answer with that before someone's like, wow, Carlos was wrong. Or he was right. Maybe I'll be lucky if I'm right. I think you're right. I think the demand is shifting. And the optimist in me believes that high value, building things where users will get value will still be rewarded. And when we think of the old internet, let's call it, some tutorials and some guides are good. Some feel a little bit like clickbait or I'm just trying to get ad revenue. Yeah. Totally. So I think the rise or this change we're talking about will actually say we need higher quality things and we need more value for our users. As far as I've heard the term answer engine optimization, AEO, and organic search and all these things we talked about are extremely important to Name.com's business, like any other registrar. We're also thinking about how we make sure that as we build blogs, as we build content, it's not for the purpose of ranking high on Google. It's for the purpose of writing really high quality content that an AI agent will eventually scrape and use as an answer for a customer because it might be the best answer. And we are starting to see a shift in organic traffic coming less and less from Google search and more from OpenAI or ChatGPT and some of these other tools. And they've been doing a good job with citing and resourcing, because at the end of the day, the e-commerce experience is still happening almost entirely at the end destination like name.com. And if that's the case, citing high quality content is going to be useful. Now, the shift is like my whole value prop or what I was pitching earlier was this idea of you might never need to leave ChatGPT. And in some cases, you might not. And I want to make sure we're well suited when that happens. I heard an interesting statistic at a recent conference where some people think by 2027, 50% of e-commerce will either initiate or happen within an agent experience. And if that's the case, we want to make sure we're ready for it.
Yeah, well, ChatGPT, OpenAI just very recently released a way to, hey, upload your product catalogs, that sort of thing to us, or at least make them accessible to us. So it's certainly changing rapidly. It can be scary and exciting at the same time. Thinking about this and not just what you've launched, but thinking about the domain industry overall, to me, to you, to your company, it matters that people still use domain names. And I think we saw with apps, when apps came out, everyone said, oh, nobody's going to need a domain name anymore because they're just going to go to these apps. And well, that didn't play out that way. So I think there's always a role for domain names. But one of the things we've talked about here is, when do you get your domain? How do you get your domain? Domain registrars, I'd say in general, have focused on what kind of you called earlier, these white label or building all the solutions themselves, because that's where the profit margins generally are. Domain names aren't the most profitable thing, but it's people are going to go to different places to do this. So it's certainly interesting to see how this is changing. And it's clear that the status quo won't work. And so it's kind of moving to where this is and positioning yourself. So really interesting. I do want to ask you one kind of final question about, vibe coding, right? Using these tools and such. So I'm not technical. And you mentioned that a lot of these tools make it easier for non-technical people to create stuff. But it seems like we're still a little ways off from creating, say, a commercial public product from these, because of that, it gets you 90% of the way there, but then that final 10%. Would you agree, and how quickly do you think this is shifting?
Yes, I would agree with that statement right now. But I think even in the last 6 months, the line where it was maybe 50% or 60% there in January, it is truly at 90% there in July. So we're still in the very, very early days. And I do hear a lot of people criticize these tools for exactly that. But I would have liked to see some of the original website builders 6 months after they launched to be like, oh, well, I can't build an e-commerce site on this thing. It's just 3 templates and there's just 4 images on it. So I do think we will hit that point, and it will happen very quickly. And we're slowly getting there.
So, Carlos, where can people go to learn more about this new name.com API?
Yeah, we officially launched it last week, and anyone who's interested can learn more at name.com/name API. And there you'll learn more about the features, the tools, all the things I've talked about today.
Awesome. Well, this is exciting. I've learned a lot. I've been, obviously, everyone, I think, in the domain industry is thinking about how AI changes our business. So I appreciate you coming on the show today and talking about this.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
My guest this week has been Carlos Armada. He is the Director of Product at name.com. That's a wrap on this week's Domain Name Wire podcast. You can listen to all previous episodes at dnw.com/podcast or on your favorite podcast app. Thanks for listening.